Y'all Sequoia folks are crazy.
We're stupid.
What's up, guys? My name is Finn. Welcome to Treehouse Off-Road. Thanks for watching. Today, it's finally time to beef up the rear axle in my 06 Sequoia, so stay tuned. In this video, I'll be swapping the rear axle from a second generation Tundra into my 2006 Sequoia. I had some help on this project, so I just want to take a second and thank Josh at First Gen Off-Road. If you've been a part of the Sequoia community for a little while, you know about Josh and his website. The prices are good, the shipping is fast, and the customer support is top notch. He's also got a YouTube channel by the same name, and this guy's got videos going all the way back to 2018. He basically pioneered modifying the Toyota Sequoia. And then I want to thank Frank over at Raceline Wheels for his patience with me. I'm not a rich man, I've had to buy these wheels one at a time over the course of the last 7 months. He's also got a YouTube channel with a lot of first gen Sequoia and family camping related content. Check it out. There are two versions of the second gen Tundra rear axle, a 9.5 inch ring gear and a 10.5 inch ring gear. I figured if I was going to do this swap, I might as well go all out, so I went for the big boy, the 10.5 inch. Why did I choose this axle? I wanted to keep it Toyota. To my knowledge, it's the biggest rear axle that Toyota makes for a passenger car, and I got a really good deal on it. I had read rumors that Randy Slauson, the 3-time winner of the King of the Hammers, used this axle on one of his Ultra 4 cars. I contacted him and confirmed this was true. Sort of. He had a diamond axle housing, a race spec ARB air locker, and aftermarket 40 spline axle shafts. What he did use was the factory Toyota third member and the factory ring and pinion, which really surprised me. But if those parts can stand up to racing, I have no doubt they'll do just fine in my Sequoia. And speaking of third members, this thing is absolutely massive. Here it is next to a 9.5 inch Land Cruiser 80 series third member. Another YouTube channel I came across while doing research for this axle swap is called Wheelin Fullsize, and this guy has a fully built second gen Tundra on 40 inch tires with the factory 10.5 inch rear axle, and he wheels this thing hard. This is another channel that's definitely worth checking out. Even if you're not building a second gen Tundra, this guy knows his stuff. I hit him up in the comments, and even though his truck weighs over 4 tons fully loaded, he's never had a single problem from this rear axle. If you want to swap this axle into anything though, there are some differences you should be aware of. First off, it's wide. The first gen Sequoia axle comes in at 69 inches wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface. The second generation Tundra axle comes in at 72 and 5/8, so almost 4 inches wider. Next is the lug pattern. The first gen Sequoia has a 6 on 5.5 lug pattern, which is very common in the Toyota world. The second gen Tundra, for whatever reason, has a 5 on 150mm lug pattern, which I'm finding is not very common and difficult to find off-road wheels for. This Tundra lug pattern can also be found on the second gen Sequoias and the Land Cruiser 200 series. Raceline Wheels to the rescue. These guys will custom cut any lug pattern into one of their beadlock wheels for you at no charge. I went with the RT 232 Monster Beadlock, and man is this thing a work of art. Now why am I doing this swap in the first place? My stock rear axle has been great. I've had zero issues with it. Now that's not to say nobody's had issues with it. It's a pretty stout rear end, but if you push anything too hard, it's gonna break. These last two examples are from First Gen Ken on Instagram. Here's another failure I found on a YouTube channel called Motions Crew. He did a number on his pinion, and from what I know, his truck is completely stock. But the grand prize goes to my buddy Frank. He blew both his diffs in one shot. Check this out. You can find the full video on his channel, but the moral of the story is wheel spin followed by sudden wheel grip equals broken stuff. Here's a glimpse into his front diff and a perfect segue into the reason I started this swap in the first place. This project started because my front diff kept failing. I've gone through 3 sets of spider gears in my front diff, and it wasn't until I installed an Eaton e-locker that it stopped breaking. But I'm still not completely comfortable taking my truck way out in the middle of nowhere with this stock 7.5 inch front diff, especially since I made the switch to 37 inch tires. So I had the idea to put a 9 inch front diff from a Land Cruiser 200 series into the truck. But since the Land Cruiser is an all-wheel drive vehicle, I had to do the next best thing. A 9 inch front diff from a second generation Tundra. They're basically the same thing, but the Tundra diff has provisions for the ADD, the automatic disconnecting differential, so my front wheels can spin freely when I'm not in 4-wheel drive. Then came the next issue, a 9 inch front diff and an 8 inch rear diff. Well, that just doesn't make any sense. So I gotta upgrade the rear diff too. And I think I'll do that one first since it's the easier swap out of the two. So I'm making good progress on the front, but this video is about the rear, so let's get right down to it. One disclaimer, this is my first axle swap ever, so it's not by any means an instructional video. This is just me sharing my experience. Hope it helps somebody. So here's the axle fresh off the truck. And guys, I knew this axle would be big, but it didn't actually hit me until I saw it with my own eyes how massive it is. Here's a picture of my hand on the pumpkin, and here's another picture of my hand on the pumpkin of my old axle. And there you can get a really good idea of the size difference. So the first order of business was to remove all the unneeded brackets, the brake lines. The e-brake lines were just cut, so I'll have to deal with those sometime later down the road. I had also slowly been collecting parts from eBay too, so I needed calipers, I needed rotors, I got a big box of brackets from Barnes 4-wheel drive. And I didn't want to have this thing on jack stands for a couple months while I was working on it, so the next thing I did was built a quick stand out of some scrap metal I had laying around and put some caster wheels on it. Then I got to work cutting off the leaf spring perches and the shock mounts. Now I got the truck up on the lift and I'm taking all my angles and writing them down. Everything relative to the pinion flange angle. Now it's time to start mocking up my coil spring buckets and tacking those on. Got these from Barnes 4-wheel drive. This is my upper link tower, also from Barnes. I'm getting rid of the upper link on the gas tank side just to make room for more flex. So this baby's got to be super strong. I tacked it together and then using my measurements from before, I put it in its initial position. I did have to modify this part a bit, but I knew that would probably be the case going into this project. I actually had to modify most of the parts to make them work for this application. Including these are the axle link mount brackets. And you can get different angles on these guys, but I bought the wrong ones. I think I got a 10-degree angle when I needed more like a 3. So I made a template and then shaved down one side of them to get the results I wanted. Now this is the offset axle panhard bracket, and this one I had to modify the hell out of. These are designed to go on the driver's side of the axle, and unlike the 4Runners, GXs, 100 series, 80 series, FJs, the Sequoia's panhard bracket is on the passenger side of the axle. So I pretty much had to tear this thing entirely down and rebuild it. I also took the opportunity to make it stronger and made sure that it didn't interfere with the coil spring bucket or spring itself. And I also had to make sure that the panhard bar wouldn't come into contact with the pumpkin while it was articulating. The last thing I did was cut a big drain hole so any water wouldn't collect inside the bracket. Alright, today's the day. Got the Sequoia in the shop and I'm putting the Tundra diff in. I've done as much measuring and building on this axle as I feel comfortable doing on the stand here, and it's just time to get it under there to locate brackets and whatnot. So it's time for this axle to come out, and it's time for that big boy to go in. Okay, shock's disconnected, drive shaft's disconnected, ABS lines are up and out of the way, panhard bar is gone, sway bar is disconnected. So now it looks like it's time to unhook the brakes, and then it's just the upper and lower control arms, and this thing should be free. Oh, and the parking brakes, I forgot about those. So this has been the most pain in the ass yet. I disconnected the parking brake here, that's for the driver's side, and here for the passenger side. I plan on using this, but they're not compatible between the axles, so it'll probably be quite some time before I figure this out. Way upstream with that e-brake. For some quick stats, my old axle had an 8-inch ring gear, the new one's 10.5. The old axle had 30 spline axle shafts, while the new one has 36 spline axle shafts. Alright, so it's time to get those lower link axle brackets installed and mock this baby up. After much whacking the axle around with a hammer, back and forth, I think I got it centered where I need it. We're looking for a pinion angle of 78.6. And we're gonna take that as a win, 78.7. These guys are going straight up and down. The lower axle side link mounts fit decent, not super great. So, let me get to welding here. The axle had been sitting for a while, so before I weld, I need to take a flap wheel to the tubes to knock some rust off, and then put a few tacks on each link bracket and see where we're at. I'm also going to take a minute and throw another Heim joint on the end of my panhard bar. This one's left-hand thread, so I should be able to just twist this bar to center the axle under the truck when I'm done.
Hello people on the internet.
Now it's time to address the rear drive shaft. As you can see, the bolt pattern on the axle does not match the bolt pattern of the drive shaft itself, but interestingly enough, that center ring allows them to fit together perfectly. My plan here is to do exactly what JHB the 4th did when he swapped his 2nd gen Tundra axle into his 1st gen. He's got a great channel devoted to his Tundra, and if you haven't checked it out, I'll leave the link down below. Here's a spare drive shaft end that I'm going to break apart and use as a template to drill my holes. I wire wheeled both surfaces so I could get a perfect fit. I clamped it on there and used a 7/16 inch bit to mark the holes. And then I just did the old start small, go up in size, lots of tap it till I was through.
Guys, I don't claim to be a guy who knows a whole hell of a lot about tools and tooling, but this is the best thing I've ever bought at Harbor Freight. Cobalt high-speed steel drill bit set. It's just like all their other ones, you know, the ones that go on sale for $9.99 or $13.99, but these are about $90 there. These things eat steel.
This upper link bracket was one of the ones that I tacked on when the axle was outside of the car, just going off the measurements I took. And I actually got pretty close. We're about 1 inch away. So I'm going to cut it off, hook up that Heim, and then tack it where it belongs. I also had to get some new misalignment spacers for the Heim. We went from a 2-inch mounting width on the stock upper link bracket to a 2 5/8 inch mounting width on the new bracket. So once again, Barnes 4-wheel drive has us covered. And guys, I am not sponsored or affiliated or involved with Barnes 4-wheel drive in any way. As you probably could guess, I've only got 5,000 subscribers, but one day I'd love to be. I've been using Barnes for a long time. Let's tack this baby on. While we're at it, we'll get this panhard bar bracket tacked on too. So these coil spring buckets, they're pretty cool. They're a 5-inch diameter, same as the bottom of the Sequoia spring, and they come with a retainer plate. Both have a hole in the center. Put a nut through and it's supposed to hold everything together, but they're for a Jeep, they're not for Toyota, and I don't really love how that looks. I don't have that much faith in it. See, the old Toyota axle has a nice molded out spot for the spring to sit, and I've actually never had it pop out on me down there. I've had it pop out up top plenty of times. I thought about cutting these off, but I want to be able to sell the axle. It's a lot of work. So this is my other idea. I took some UHMW, some ultra high molecular weight plastic, and I figured if I heat up the end of that spring and heat up the plastic and hold it down onto it, it would just bury itself and melt itself down in there, creating a situation where it would be held in place side to side, and I could put a hole through the middle of it and bolt it right down on top of that coil spring pad. This particular problem plagued me on this axle, and I could not figure out a way to do it, and then this idea just came to me. So I had no idea at this point if it'll work, but we melted them, cut them out, and it ended up working great. So we'll come back to these when it's time for final assembly.
So after articulating this thing and playing around with it and looking at the numbers, these lower shock mounts aren't going to work for this application. This is how Toyota does it. This is what's worked great so far in this truck. I'm not really trying to change any of the suspension characteristics. My goal is to beef up the axle. If I can get a little bit more travel out of it by switching up my shocks and doing a couple other small things, fine, but I'd love it to stay the way it is because it performs great for me for what it is. Full-size 8-seater. So this is what I came up with after some back and forth and some trials and tribulations. Here's the axle tube. This is going to sit like this. And then the mount that I already have is going to come off here. So the shock will ride somewhere like that.
So this is 1/4-inch plate that I'm using that I got off Craigslist a while ago. The Barnes lower shock brackets that I got mount directly to the axle tube, but in order to use a longer shock, I need them to extend down below the axle tube. So what I'm doing is I'm just making some extensions to mount the brackets to. It's gonna be really nice once we get a plasma cutter in here. Till then, I'm gonna keep paying my dues, slapping a 7-inch wheel on a 5-inch grinder. And we end up with something that looks like this. I gotta say, I'm not completely in love with how it looks, but it will do the job I need it to do. So it's all tacked up now. I've made all the small adjustments I need to make to everything. I do need to remove the panhard bracket and paint the inside of it, as well as the axle space behind it so it doesn't rust from the inside out. I also have to remember to leave holes for water to escape. I don't want any puddles forming in this thing. The next step is to start blasting away all this rust and do some surface prep. I do plan to paint this axle black. In my lifetime, I've almost exclusively used flat black spray paint, but for this, I want to go for the more factory Toyota look, so I'm going to use a satin black. This was my first experience with Steel It, and it went okay. I don't think I let it dry enough before welding on it. Here I'm burning in the upper link bracket and both lower link brackets. And I gotta give a shout out to my beautiful wife Vanessa for her support through this project. As you can see, I worked a few late nights while she was at home alone with the baby. And now we're burning in the lower shock mounts.
Alright guys, so like a lot of these videos, I hope you can learn from my mistakes. I noticed oil coming out of the vent right here and thought to myself, is there freaking oil in this thing? Why would they ship it with oil in it? It never occurred to me. I mean, that just seems so stupid that it could make such a big mess in the back of a delivery truck or whatever, but it was full. It was absolutely full. I cracked the fill port and it let out a little tss, like there had been pressure built up in this thing. And I'm remembering now that if you put too much heat to an axle like this while there's oil in it, you can blow your seals. And I'm hoping that didn't happen. I don't see any signs of oil coming from the actual tubes out of the seals yet, but who knows? I'm done for tonight. This thing holds about 1 gallon of gear oil. At least it's clean. I mean, it looks really good.
Here's how the lower shock mounts came out. The new Harbor Freight welder is killing them. So we got the Vulcan 220 and we love it. My old Lincoln 180 flux core was great. I think it was just tired. I pushed it well beyond its duty cycle on multiple occasions. Time to weld on the panhard bar. We're getting there. Like I mentioned, I left a spot for water to escape on the lowest part of that upper link mount. I left the back plates off these lower shock mounts so I could weld all the way around. If I had put them on there, I wouldn't have been able to get weld inside there. So it's time to put those on. But first I'm going to mask it off and paint it. And I'm going to do the same thing for the plates so they can have some paint on the inside of them. Alright, so here are the brake lines for the axle. Here are the brackets that I cut off initially. This is from the parking brake that they just cut off at the junkyard. I'll have to get that going at some point in the future. But for now, I got to get these brake lines bent. They've been in storage for a while and they kind of got messed up. So I'm going to get them bent up. I'm going to get the brackets where they need to be and weld the brackets back on. This is when it all started to seem real for me. I took a guess on the paint, but it came out just how I wanted. It looks just like a brand new Toyota axle. I also decided to throw a coat of paint on my springs. They were looking pretty raggedy. I tried my best to match my front eye box springs, and I think it came out great. And if you ever buy calipers from the junkyard, this is what you can expect the fluid to look like.
For the views, baby.
Alright, just got my shocks in the mail. For these shocks and my last set of Dobinsons, I went through Josh at First Gen Off-Road. The reason I went with Dobinsons is because I had great experience with my last set of Dobinsons. I absolutely annihilated them. So this time I went with the IMS linear valved shocks. It's a 2.6 inch body, so it's just over a 2.5. I think that's how they do it in Australia. Alright, let's take this thing off and do a comparison to one of my old shocks. Okay, good, they're longer. So these guys are 28 3/4 inches long, full extension, 11 1/4 inches of travel. My only complaint with these shock absorbers so far is that they didn't include enough hardware. Dobinsons, why?
Okay, so as you guys can see with the shock in a factory location, I end up with 3 inches of travel or less. You can see how compressed this shock boot is. So let me take you over to the other side and show you what I did a few weeks ago. So now we're on the passenger side, and what I did over here was I made a box that raises the upper shock mounting position by about 2 inches. And it's been working great. I haven't been bottoming out. On this side, we have about 5 inches, which is way better than that side. So today I'm going to be doing the same thing I did on the passenger side to the driver's side. Let's go. So now that we're up here, you can see what I'm talking about better. It just pops out of there, giving it an extra 2 inches of travel. And the reason I can do this, you guys, is because I have a 2.5 inch body lift. Okay, so now I got this box for the driver's side, and basically I have to stick it where I want it, draw an outline, and cut a square right here to put it through. Got a welding blanket over the plastic fuel tank for obvious reasons. I got some trimming to do, but there's the basic idea. I'm also using some step bits. I got this hole big enough for the shock washer. Slips in there perfectly. All welded up, ready to go. So here it is up there after being welded, and I got all the sides to line up pretty well. Sorry, it's very hard to get a shot up here. She's done, she's in, she's welded top and bottom. So 11 1/4 or 11 1/8. Next up is limit straps, so don't kill these shocks like I killed my last set. She's in there. Almost looks like it belongs there. I've put X amount of miles on it so far, and it's running great.